The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken dreams, a scent Chen had grown to associate with failure. She sat in the defendant's chair, her calloused hands folded in her lap, watching Judge Harrison flip through her file with the kind of theatrical disdain that made her jaw clench. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the mahogany bench where he presided like some ancient deity of bureaucratic disappointment. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Miss Chen, Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. I see here that you've been arrested for trespassing on government property, again. He emphasized the last word like a parent scolding a particularly slow child. Third time this year, if I'm reading this correctly. Maya's attorney, a public defender named Rodriguez who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, shuffled his papers nervously. Your Honor, my client was simply trying to access the Veterans Assistance Office after hours. She wasn't aware. Judge Harrison's laugh was cold, mechanical. Ms. Chen, it says here you're 38 years old. Surely by now you've learned to read a clock. The office closes at 5. It was 11 p.m. when the security guard found you trying to break down their door. The gallery behind Maya was nearly empty except for Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor who had insisted on coming for moral support, and Detective Sarah Mills, a woman Maya had met during her previous arrests who seemed genuinely concerned about her well-being. Detective Mills leaned forward in her seat, her brow furrowed with something that looked like recognition. Though Maya couldn't place where they might have met before today, Maya felt the familiar weight in her chest, the pressure that had been building for 15 years, pressing against her ribs like a caged animal. She stared at the judge's soft hands. Hands that had never wrapped around anything more dangerous than a gavel. Hands that had never trembled while applying pressure to a sucking chest wound in the mountains of Afghanistan. Your Honor, Rodriguez. Tried again. My client is a veteran. She served. I don't care if she served coffee at the Pentagon. Judge Harrison interrupted, and something dangerous flickered behind Maya's dark eyes. Service doesn't give anyone the right to break the law. In fact, I'd argue it makes this behavior even more disappointing. He leaned back in his leather chair, the kind of chair Maya knew cost more than most people made in a month. Tell me, Ms. Chen, what exactly did you do in the military? File paperwork? Serve in the mess hall? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Maya's fingers twitched involuntarily. Muscle memory from years of training that had been buried so deep she sometimes wondered if she'd imagined it all. She could feel Detective Mills' eyes on her, studying her posture, the way she held her head, the scars barely visible beneath her long sleeves. I was support staff, Maya said quietly, the lie feeling like ash in her mouth. Judge Harrison snorted. Support staff, of course. He scribbled something in his notes. Well, Ms. Chen, your support clearly didn't teach you much about following orders or respecting authority. 3 arrests in 1 year tells me you're either incredibly stupid or incredibly stubborn. Maya's breathing changed, became controlled, measured. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way she'd been taught when the world was exploding around her and staying calm meant the difference between mission success and body bags. She thought about the bronze star hidden in a shoebox in her closet, about the commendations she'd never shown anyone, about the night she'd carried 2 wounded Marines 3 miles through enemy territory, while taking fire from all sides. Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd known Maya for 5 years now, had watched her struggle with nightmares and panic attacks, had seen her gentle way with stray animals and her fierce protection of the neighborhood kids. This wasn't the Maya she knew, this silent statue of controlled fury. The defendant appears to have some sort of learning disability. Judge Harrison continued, addressing Rodriguez as if Maya wasn't sitting right there. Multiple arrests, inability to understand simple concepts like business hours, resistance to authority. I'm beginning to think jail time might be the only thing that gets through to her. Detective Mills found herself gripping the edge of the wooden bench. Something about Maya's stillness bothered her, reminded her of footage she'd seen from the police academy. Videos of soldiers under extreme stress who had learned to channel their reactions into something deadlier than rage. Maya's hands clenched into fists, the first time Mills had seen her lose her carefully maintained composure. They vandalized her door? She's 73 years old. She's never hurt anyone in her life. Maya, I know this is hard, but running isn't going to solve this. The story's already out there, and these people won't stop until they get what they want, which is either proof or a complete public humiliation. Mills leaned against the counter. But I think I might have a solution. Maya looked up, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. There's someone I want you to meet. Colonel James Mitchell, retired. He runs a foundation for special operations veterans. He's been following your story, and he says he can verify your service record through unofficial channels. Mills paused. He also says he's been looking for you for 15 years. The name hit Maya like a physical blow. Mitchell had been her commanding officer during her final deployment, the man who had tried to talk her out of leaving, who had understood better than anyone the cost of the work they did. If he was involved, if he was vouching for her, it changed everything. How do I know this isn't another trap? Another way for someone to get their 15 minutes of fame at my expense. Mills pulled out her phone and showed Maya a text message. Because he sent me this. The message was brief. Ghost earned every commendation in her file. Tell her Reaper says it's time to come home. Maya's breath caught. Reaper had been Mitchell's call sign, a name earned through 25 years of operations that had shaped the modern face of American Special Forces. More importantly, he was one of only 3 people who knew the full story of her final mission, the one that had earned her the classified commendation that couldn't be discussed in public. When? Maya asked. He's flying in tomorrow. Wants to meet at the Veterans Cemetery on Hillcrest Drive, noon. Mills studied Maya's face. He says to tell you he still has your final after-action report, the real one. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat on her fire escape, watching the news vans that had become a permanent fixture on her street, and thought about the 15 years she'd spent building a life that was crumbling around her. Below, she could see Mrs. Patterson's doorway. Someone had tried to scrub away the spray paint, leaving ghostly traces of the word Lear still visible in the porch light. Around 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You've destroyed enough lives. End this before someone gets hurt. Maya stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. But she couldn't delete the knowledge that somewhere in the city, people she cared about were lying awake worrying about what tomorrow would bring, all because she'd finally told the truth about who she was. Monday morning brought a new development that changed the entire dynamic of the story. Maya woke to find Mrs. Patterson standing in her doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour, holding a manila envelope and wearing an expression of quiet determination. I have something for you, the older woman said, stepping into Maya's apartment without waiting for an invitation. Something I should have given you years ago. Mrs. Patterson opened the envelope and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a young soldier in military fatigues, standing next to what was clearly an older version of Mrs. Patterson, both of them smiling in front of a welcome home banner. My grandson Tommy, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. The one I told you about who came back from Iraq different. She handed Maya the photo. He served with a joint task force. Special operations. He told me stories he probably shouldn't have about the people who kept his unit alive when everything went wrong. Maya studied the photo. seeing something familiar in the young soldier's eyes, the same haunted look she'd seen in her own mirror for 15 years. There was a sniper, he said. Someone who made impossible shots, who appeared out of nowhere. When things got desperate, they called her Ghost. Mrs. Patterson's voice was soft but steady. Tommy said she saved his life in Afghanistan. Saw and she carried him and 3 other wounded soldiers to safety after their convoy was ambushed. Maya's hands began to shake. She remembered that mission. Remembered the young soldier with the leg wound who'd kept apologizing for being too heavy to carry. She'd told him the same thing she'd told all the wounded. Nobody gets left behind. Tommy died 3 years after he came home, Mrs. Patterson continued. Not from his wounds, but from what the war did to his mind. But before he died, he made me promise something. She reached into the envelope again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He made me promise that if I ever met someone who reminded me of his guardian angel, I'd give them this. Maya unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It was a letter, written in the careful handwriting of someone fighting through pain medication and emotional trauma. To Ghost, wherever you are, I don't know your real name, and I know you probably don't remember me. I was just another wounded soldier you saved, one of hundreds probably. But I remember you. I remember your voice telling me to stay awake, that we were almost home. I remember the way you made that impossible shot that ended the ambush. I remember how you stayed with me in the medical tent until the medic said I was stable. You probably saved dozens of lives that day, but you saved mine specifically, and I need you to know that mattered. The world needs people like you in it. Don't ever forget that. Maya was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she read words she'd never expected to see. Tommy Patterson, she remembered him now, remembered his determination to walk again. His jokes during the long helicopter ride to safety. His gratitude that had embarrassed her because she'd just been doing her job. He signed up for more tours after that, Mrs. Patterson said. Said he wanted to be like you, wanted to save people. The way you saved him. But the war took him piece by piece, until there wasn't enough left to save. Maya looked up at her neighbor, this woman who had known all along who she was, but had waited for the right moment to reveal that knowledge. Why didn't you tell me before? Because you weren't ready to hear it. You were still running from who? You were still trying to convince yourself that the person you used to be didn't matter. Mrs. Patterson sat down beside Maya on the couch. But now the whole world is questioning whether you're telling the truth, and I couldn't let you face that alone. The veterans' cemetery was quiet when Maya arrived at noon, the October air crisp with the promise of winter. She found Colonel Mitchell sitting on a bench near the memorial wall, his once powerful frame showing the effects of age but his bearing still unmistakably military. He looked up as she approached, and his face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen in days. "Hello, Ghost," he said simply. "Colonel." Maya sat down beside him, feeling 15 years of careful emotional control beginning to unravel. "I heard you've been looking for me. Every damn day since you disappeared." Mitchell's voice carried a mixture of relief and reproach. "Do you have any idea how many people have been wondering what happened to you? How many operations have gone sideways because we didn't have our best shooter?" Maya stared at the names carved into the memorial wall, each one representing someone who hadn't made it home. "I couldn't do it anymore, sir. I was becoming something I didn't recognize." "You were becoming exactly what your country needed you to become," Mitchell said firmly. "But I understand why you left, the work we do. It changes us. Not everyone can carry that weight forever." He pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase. "Your complete service record. Every mission, every commendation, every classified operation. That can't be discussed in public. I've been authorized to release what we can to verify your claims." Maya took the folder but didn't open it. Why now? Why reveal all this after 15 years of silence? Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, watching the grounds crew tend to the graves with respectful efficiency. Because the world's changed, Maya. The threats we face now are different, more complex. We need experienced operators in civilian positions. People who understand both worlds. He looked at her directly. And because watching you get crucified in the media for telling the truth is something I won't tolerate. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to stop hiding. To use the skills you've spent 15 years trying to bury. There's a place for you if you want it. A way to serve without carrying a rifle, without making the impossible shots that kept you awake at night. Mitchell handed her a business card. The foundation I run helps special operations veterans transition to civilian life. We need someone who understands what they're going through, someone who's walked the path from warrior to citizen. Maya studied the card. Mitchell Foundation for Special Operations Veterans, bridging the gap between service and civilian life. I've tried civilian life, sir. It doesn't work for people like us. It works when you stop pretending to be someone else, Mitchell said gently. You've spent 15 years trying to be normal, Maya, but normal was never an option for you. The question is, what are you going to do with who you really are? As they sat in the cemetery surrounded by the names of fallen soldiers, Maya felt something shifting inside her, a recognition that the person she'd been trying to leave behind was also the person she needed to become again. Not the weapon she'd been afraid of being, but the protector she'd always been meant to be. The decision to go public with her full story wasn't made lightly. Maya spent 3 days reviewing her service record with Mitchell, identifying what could be disclosed without compromising national security. The Foundation's legal team worked with military authorities to create a sanitized but verifiable account of her service that would satisfy media demands while protecting operational security. The press conference was scheduled for Friday morning at the Mitchell Foundation offices. Maya had insisted on specific conditions: no ambush questions, no cameras in the building during her arrival, and the right to leave if the questioning became hostile. But most importantly, she demanded that the focus be on the Foundation's work rather than her personal story. Creating this detailed story with all its complex character development and military accuracy required significant time and research. If you're finding value in Maya's journey and want to see more stories like this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives. No ambush questions, no cameras in the building during her arrival, and the right to leave if the questioning became hostile. But most importantly, she demanded that the focus be on the Foundation's work rather than her personal story. Thursday night, Maya sat in Mrs. Patterson's apartment, sharing dinner and watching the news coverage that had dominated the airwaves. For a week, the older woman had become her anchor during the chaos, providing both emotional support and practical advice about dealing with media attention. You know, Mrs. Patterson said during a commercial break, Tommy would be proud of what you're doing. Not the military service, he already knew about that. But this, choosing to trust people with the truth instead of running away from it. Maya looked at the photograph of Tommy Patterson that now sat on her kitchen table, a reminder that her service had mattered to real people with real faces and real families. I'm scared, she admitted. What if this changes everything? What if the people I care about get hurt because of who I used to be? Honey, the people who matter already know who you are. The rest is just noise. Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. Besides, you can't protect people by lying to them. Trust is built on truth, not comfort. That night, Maya packed her service medals in a small box and prepared for the morning. That would either validate 15 years of hiding or destroy the fragile peace she'd built in her civilian life. Either way, she was done running from the person she'd been trained to be. Maya's apartment was a study in controlled emptiness. No photographs on the walls, no personal mementos on the sparse furniture, nothing that would give a stranger insight into who she was or where she'd been. The only exception was a small succulent plant Mrs. Patterson had given her last Christmas, which sat on the windowsill like a green beacon of stubborn life in an otherwise sterile space. She moved through her morning routine with military precision. 500 hours wake-up, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 3-mile run through the pre-dawn streets of her neighborhood. The same route every day, past the closed shops and sleeping houses, her breath creating small clouds in the October chill. Other early risers had learned to recognize her, the postal worker starting his route, the baker opening her shop, the construction crew gathering at the corner diner. They'd nod or wave, and Maya would respond with a brief smile that never quite reached her eyes. During her run, Maya's mind would drift to places she tried to keep locked away during daylight hours. The weight of her rifle, perfectly balanced in her hands. The feeling of absolute stillness that came in the moments before pulling the trigger. The faces of her teammates, men who had trusted her with their lives and who she'd failed in the end by simply disappearing one night without explanation. After her run, she'd shower and dress in the same uniform she wore every day, dark jeans, long-sleeved cotton shirts that covered the scars on her arms, boots that could take her anywhere. She needed to go quickly and quietly. Then coffee, black, while she watched the sun come up over a city that had no idea who lived among them. Maya worked at Henderson's hardware store, a family-owned business that had been struggling to compete with the big box retailers for 20 years. Old man Henderson had hired her 3 years ago after she'd helped him fix a broken lock on his back door, picked it in 30 seconds flat, then showed him 3 different ways to reinforce it against intruders. He'd never asked about her background, just handed her an apron and told her she started Monday. "You're good with your hands," he'd said, watching her rewire a vintage electrical fixture. "And you don't talk much. I like that in an employee." Maya had found peace in the routine of inventory, customer service, and small repairs. The work was honest, straightforward, and didn't require her to make decisions that could get people killed. But even in the safety of Henderson's hardware, she couldn't completely turn off the part of her brain that had kept her alive through 8 years of operations that officially never happened. She cataloged every customer who walked through the door, their gait, their hand positioning, whether they were carrying anything that could be used as a weapon, where they positioned themselves relative to exits. It was exhausting, this constant state of readiness for threats that would never materialize, but she'd long ago given up trying to shut it off. Mrs. Patterson was perhaps the only person in Maya's life who had managed to slip past her defenses, and even that had taken 2 years of patient persistence. The 73-year-old retired librarian lived in the apartment next door and had a gift for showing up at exactly the right moment with exactly the right thing, a plate of homemade cookies, when Maya was having a particularly bad week, a book recommendation when she seemed restless, or just a quiet presence on the building's shared fire escape during the nights when sleep was impossible. "You remind me of my grandson," Mrs. Patterson had said one evening as they sat watching the sunset. "He came back from Iraq different, quieter, like he was carrying something too heavy to set down." Maya had tensed, ready to deflect or disappear. But Mrs. Patterson had just continued watering her plants, giving Maya space to respond or not respond as she chose. "What happened to him?" Maya had asked finally. "He learned to trust people again. Took time, but he got there." Mrs. Patterson had looked at her with eyes that seemed to see everything. "The war doesn't end just because you come home, dear, but it doesn't have to last forever either." Those words had haunted Maya for months. She'd built her civilian life around the principle that the war was over, that she could simply close the door on who she'd been and become someone new. But every night brought the same dreams, sand and blood and the weight of decisions that had shaped the course of history. In ways the public would never know, the Veterans' Assistance Office had become her obsession, not because she needed their services, Her disability benefits and pension were handled through channels that didn't require her to sit in waiting rooms, filled with damaged soldiers, but because she was searching for something she couldn't name. Connection, maybe. Or absolution. Or just proof that the person she'd been had mattered to someone besides the enemies she'd eliminated and the teammates she'd abandoned. She'd tried going during regular hours initially, sitting in those plastic chairs while social workers fresh out of college tried to connect her with job training programs and housing assistance she didn't need. But every conversation followed the same script. What was your MOS? Where did you serve? Any combat experience? And Maya would give the same sanitized answers, feeling like a fraud among the wounded warriors who wore their service openly, who talked about their deployments and their struggles with the kind of honesty she couldn't afford. The night break-ins had started as reconnaissance. She'd told herself she was just checking their security, making sure they were properly protected. But really, she was looking for files, records, anything that might tell her about the soldiers they helped. She wanted to know their stories, to understand how they'd found their way back to the world of the living. During one midnight visit, she'd found herself in the counselor's office, sitting in the chair where dozens of veterans had poured out their pain. On the desk was a photo of a young Marine in dress blues, and Maya had stared at it for 20 minutes, trying to remember what it felt like to be that proud of who you were. The arrests had been almost a relief. Finally, consequences. Finally, someone paying attention, even if it was the wrong kind of attention. Detective Mills had been kind but persistent, asking questions that skirted the edges of Maya's carefully constructed cover story. Maya had found herself looking forward to their interactions, the way Mills treated her like a puzzle to be solved rather than a problem to be processed. Maya's friendship with the neighborhood kids had developed accidentally. She'd been walking home from work one evening when she'd seen 3 teenagers cornering a younger boy behind the corner market. Without thinking, she'd intervened, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made the older kids back off immediately. The boy, Marcus, had been 12 and trying not to cry, and something about his stubborn pride had reminded her of herself at that age. "Thank you," he'd said, straightening his backpack. "You hurt?" Maya had asked, checking him for injuries with the kind of thorough assessment that came from years of battlefield medicine. "Nah, they're just jerks." Marcus had looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than 12. "You used to be a cop or something." Maya had almost smiled. Something like that. That had been the beginning. Marcus would find excuses to hang around the hardware store after school, helping her stock shelves and asking endless questions about tools and repairs. His younger sister Carmen had followed, along with their cousin Diego and a rotating cast of other neighborhood kids who seemed drawn to Maya's quiet competence and endless patience. She'd taught them practical skills, how to fix a bicycle chain, how to change a tire, how to defend themselves without throwing the first punch. But more importantly, she'd given them something she'd never had at their age, an adult who listened without judgment and who treated their problems like they mattered. "Ms. Maya," Carmen had asked one day while they were working on her science project, "were you ever scared when you were a kid?" Maya had paused in her explanation of simple machines, remembering a childhood spent moving from foster home to foster home, never knowing when the next placement would fall through. "Every day," she'd said honestly. "What did you do about it?" "I got stronger. And I learned that being scared doesn't mean you can't do what needs to be done." The kids had become her anchor to the present, their uncomplicated faith in her goodness, a counterweight to the darkness she carried. When Marcus had won the school science fair with a project she'd helped him design, when Carmen had stood up to bullies using techniques Maya had taught her, when Diego had chosen to walk away from gang recruitment because Maya had shown him other options, those moments had felt like small victories against the weight of everything she'd lost. But even surrounded by these connections, Maya felt the fundamental loneliness that came from living a lie. Every relationship was built on half-truths, every conversation carefully navigated to avoid the subjects that mattered most. She was like a woman walking on ice, always conscious that one wrong step would send her crashing through into waters too cold and deep to survive. The nights were the worst. When the distractions of work and routine fell away, when the apartment was quiet and the shadows on the walls looked too much like the mountains of Afghanistan, Maya would find herself on the fire escape, staring at the city lights and remembering what it felt like to matter, to be part of something larger than herself, to use her skills for something besides fixing broken appliances and mediating disputes between teenagers. Sometimes she would take out the box from her closet, the one containing her medals and commendations, the photos of her team, the letters from families of soldiers she'd saved. She would hold these pieces of her former life like artifacts from a dead civilization, trying to remember who she'd been when she wore the uniform, when her name was spoken with respect in the highest levels of military command, when her skills could change the outcome of international conflicts. The Bronze Star citation was particular torture to read, for heroic achievement in ground operations against hostile forces during Operation Enduring Freedom. Staff Sergeant Chen's exceptional marksmanship and tactical brilliance resulted in the successful extraction of 43 American personnel from a hostile environment. Her actions under extreme duress exemplify the finest traditions of military service. 43 lives. Maya would close her eyes and try to remember their faces, the gratitude in their eyes when she'd appeared like an angel of death to end their nightmare. But 15 years had blurred the details, leaving only the weight of the responsibility she'd walked away from. The decision to leave had been made in a single moment of clarity that had taken months to understand. She'd been in a briefing room in a facility that didn't exist, listening to her commanding officer describe their next target. Another high-value elimination, another surgical strike that would shift the balance of power in a conflict the public would never know about. Routine, by their standards. But as Maya had looked around the room at the faces of her teammates, good men who trusted her completely, who would follow her into hell without question, she'd realized that she was disappearing. Piece by piece, mission by mission. "I'm done," she'd said quietly, interrupting the briefing. The silence that followed had been deafening. These men had never heard her question an order, never seen her show anything but absolute commitment to the mission. "Chen, Lieutenant Commander?" Reyes had looked at her with concern. "You feeling all right?" "I said I'm done." Maya had stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I want out." The bureaucratic machinery of leaving special operations had been surprisingly simple. One day she was Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, one of the most lethal snipers in the history of naval special warfare. The next day she was a civilian with a pension and a DD-214 that sanitized 8 years of classified operations into bland administrative language. She'd chosen her new city randomly, sticking a pin in a map and ending up in a place where no one knew her name or her history. She'd rented the first apartment she'd looked at, gotten the first job that would hire her, and begun the process of becoming someone new. But you can't kill the parts of yourself that made you who you are, Maya had learned. The skills remained. The ability to read a room in seconds, to move through crowds without being noticed, to make impossible shots with whatever weapon came to hand. The instincts remained, the constant scanning for threats, the tactical assessment of every environment, the hair-trigger readiness for violence that had kept her alive but made peace impossible. And the memories remained, surfacing at unexpected moments. The taste of dust and cordite, the sound of helicopters in the distance, the feeling of perfect stillness that came in the moment, between heartbeats when everything balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. Maya had thought she could bury these things, build a normal life on top of them like a house on shifting ground. But 15 years of trying had taught her that some foundations can't be covered, only managed. And management required constant vigilance, constant effort, constant lies, The morning after her courtroom revelation, Maya sat on her fire escape with her coffee and watched the sun come up over a city that looked exactly the same but felt fundamentally different. For the first time in 15 years, someone knew who she really was. The secret that had shaped every aspect of her civilian life was out, at least partially, and Maya wasn't sure if that meant freedom or the beginning of the end. The story broke 3 days after Maya's court appearance, though not in the way anyone expected. Detective Mills had kept her word about discretion, but word traveled fast in certain circles, and by Wednesday morning, Maya's phone was ringing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The first was from Marcus's mother, Elena Rodriguez, her voice tight with concern. "Maya, honey, there are people outside your building. Reporters, I think. Marcus saw them when he was walking to school and called me." Maya peered through her window blinds and counted 4 news vans, 2 newspaper reporters she recognized from their photos, and what looked like a small crowd of onlookers. "I see them," she said quietly. "You can stay with us if you need to," Elena offered. "The couch folds out, and you know the kids would love having you around." The kindness in her voice almost broke Maya's composure. Elena was a single mother, working 2 jobs to keep her family afloat, and here she was offering sanctuary to someone whose presence might bring unwanted attention to her home. "Thank you, but I'll handle this." Maya ended the call and immediately dialed Henderson's hardware. Old man Henderson answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 67 years and 4 heart attacks. "Maya, good. I was hoping you'd call." He paused, and she could hear him moving around the store. "Got a reporter here asking questions about you. Real pushy type. Wants to know about your work history, your habits, whether I knew about your military service." "What did you tell him?" "Told him to buy something or get out." Henderson chuckled dryly. "But Maya, I'm not stupid. Woman doesn't learn to rewire a building's electrical system and field strip a carburetor by serving coffee in the army. You want to tell me what's really going on?" Maya closed her eyes, feeling the foundation she'd built over 15 years beginning to crack. "It's complicated, Mr. Henderson. Most worthwhile things are. Look, I don't care what you did before you started working for me. You show up on time, you do good work, and you don't steal from the till. That's all I need to know." His voice softened slightly. "But if staying here is going to cause you problems, or cause me problems, we need to talk about it." The implication was clear. Maya's newfound notoriety could hurt the struggling business that had become her refuge. The thought of losing Henderson's hardware, of disappointing the man who had given her a chance when she'd needed one most, made her chest tight with anxiety. "I understand," Maya said. "I'll figure something out." By Thursday, the situation had escalated beyond simple media curiosity. Maya woke to find protesters outside her building, not many, maybe a dozen, but their presence changed everything. Half-carried signs supporting her service, messages like "Thank you for your service" and "American hero." The other half held placards questioning women in combat roles and demanding proof of service records. Mrs. Patterson knocked on Maya's door around 10 a.m., carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing an expression Maya had never seen before. Protective fury barely contained beneath her usual gentle demeanor. "Those people out there," Mrs. Patterson said without preamble. "They woke up the Martinez baby at 6 a.m. with their shouting. Elena's afraid to send the kids to school because of all the cameras." She set the thermos down hard enough to rattle Maya's sparse kitchen table. "This isn't right." Maya had been dreading this conversation. Mrs. Patterson's disappointment hurt worse than any criticism from strangers because it mattered, because it came from someone whose opinion had become important to her daily survival. "I'm sorry," Maya said, meaning it completely. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I'm not mad at you, dear." Mrs. Patterson's voice was fierce. "I'm mad at them. At this whole circus." She gestured toward the window. "You've lived here. For 5 years. You've helped every family in this building at one point or another. You've never asked for anything from anyone. And now they want to turn you into some kind of spectacle. But Maya could see the worry in her neighbor's eyes, the way she kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting trouble to follow her upstairs. The media attention was affecting everyone Maya cared about, dragging innocent people into a story. They hadn't signed up for. The situation reached a tipping point. Friday afternoon, when Maya returned from a grocery run to find Marcus sitting on the building's front steps, his school backpack beside him, and tears of frustration in his eyes. "They wouldn't let me through," he said as Maya approached. "The reporters. They kept asking me questions about you, taking pictures of me. One of them said they'd give me $20 if I told them what your apartment looks like inside." Maya's vision went red around the edges. She dealt with foreign operatives, corrupt government officials, and enemy combatants without losing her composure. But the sight of a 12-year-old boy being harassed by adults who should know better triggered something primal and protective. "Stay here," she told Marcus, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made him nod immediately. Maya walked toward the crowd of reporters, her movement drawing their attention like metal to a magnet. Cameras swung in her direction, microphones thrust forward, and suddenly she was surrounded by a circle of people shouting questions at her. Double quotes, "Miss Chen, can you confirm your service record? Is it true you were involved in classified operations? How? Do you respond to critics who say women aren't physically capable of meeting SEAL standards? What's your reaction to Congressman Bradley's statement that your claims are impossible to verify?" Maya stood completely still in the center of the chaos, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing controlled. She let them exhaust themselves with questions, waiting for the moment when the noise died down enough for her voice to carry. "You have 30 seconds to leave this area," she said finally, her words cutting through the chatter like a knife. "After that, I'm calling the police." A reporter from Channel 7, a thin man with expensive hair and cheap eyes, pushed forward. "Ms. Chen, the public has a right to know. The public has a right to accurate reporting," Maya interrupted. "They don't have a right to harass children or block access to private residences." She looked directly into his camera. "And neither do you. Are you threatening us?" The reporter's tone was mocking, calculated to provoke a reaction that would make good television. Maya smiled, and everyone who knew her would have recognized it as a warning sign. "I'm giving you information. What you do with it is your choice." She turned and walked back to Marcus, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions and the flash of cameras. But as she passed the reporter who had been pushing the hardest, she spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Jim Morrison, Channel 7. Divorced, 2 kids you see every other weekend. Drives a leased BMW that's 3 payments behind. Lives at 1247 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Maya didn't break stride or look at him. "Funny how much you can learn about someone when you really want to, isn't it?" The reporter's face went white. He knew, as anyone with sense would know, that someone who could gather that information so quickly and deliver it so casually was not someone to be taken lightly. By Saturday, the media circus had evolved into something uglier. Talk radio hosts were debating Maya's story, with some calling her a hero and others demanding proof that couldn't be provided without compromising national security. Online forums buzzed with conspiracy theories, doctored photos, and vicious personal attacks from people who had never met her but felt qualified to judge her entire life. The breaking point came Sunday evening. Maya was in Henderson's Hardware after hours, using her key to stock inventory and avoid the crowds that had made her daytime appearances impossible, when she heard the front door chime. She looked up to see Detective Mills entering the store, her expression grim. "We need to talk," Mills said without preamble. Maya set down the box of screws she'd been organizing. "What's happened?" "Someone called in a bomb threat to the elementary school Marcus attends." said they were targeting associates of the fake soldier. Mills ran a hand through her hair. School's been evacuated. Bomb squad found nothing, but the kids are terrified. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. They're targeting children now. It gets worse. Elena Rodriguez got a call at work today. Someone claiming to be from ICE, asking about her immigration status, wanting to know about her association with persons of interest. It was fake, we checked, but it scared her enough that she's thinking about pulling the kids out of school and moving back to her mother's place in Phoenix. Maya sank onto a stool behind the counter. Everything she'd tried to protect by hiding her identity was crumbling around her. The people who mattered to her were paying the price for her moment of honesty in that courtroom. There's more, Mills continued. Henderson's been getting calls. People threatening to boycott his store if he keeps employing you. And someone spray-painted liar on Mrs. Patterson's door last night. Maya's hands, the press conference room at the Mitchell Foundation was smaller than Maya had expected, designed to feel more like a conference room than a media circus. 30 folding chairs faced a simple table where Maya sat between Colonel Mitchell and the Foundation's director, Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname. Behind them, a projection screen displayed the Foundation logo and a simple message, supporting those who served in silence. Maya had chosen her outfit carefully, dress blues that hadn't seen daylight in 15 years, her ribbons and medals arranged in precise order according to regulations she could recite from memory. The bronze star sat at the top of the rack. Its distinctive red, white, and blue ribbon a splash of color against the navy fabric. She'd debated wearing the uniform at all, wondering if it would seem like theater, but Mitchell had insisted. "You earned the right to wear those colors," he'd said. "Let them see who you really are." The room filled slowly with reporters, photographers, and representatives from veterans organizations. Maya recognized several faces from the circus outside. Her apartment building, including Jim Morrison from Channel 7, who avoided eye contact and positioned himself in the back of the room. Detective Mills sat in the front row, having requested permission to attend in her capacity as the arresting officer whose investigation had uncovered Maya's true identity. At exactly 10 a.m., Mitchell stepped to the microphone. His introduction was brief and professional, outlining Maya's service record in broad strokes while emphasizing the classified nature of many of her operations. He presented official documentation from Naval Personnel Command, verification from the Pentagon, and testimonials from commanding officers who had worked with her during her 8-year career. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mitchell concluded, "it is my honor to introduce Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, United States Navy, retired. A patriot, a warrior, and a woman who has served her country with distinction in ways that most of you will never fully understand." Maya approached the microphone with the same controlled movement she'd used to approach sniper positions in hostile territory. She looked out at the sea of faces, cameras, and recording devices, and felt the familiar calm that came with accepting a mission she couldn't refuse. "Good morning. My name is Maya Chen, and for the past 15 years, I've been hiding from you." She paused, letting the admission settle. "Not because I was ashamed of my service, but because I believed that the person I had been in the military couldn't coexist with the person I wanted to become as a civilian." The first question came from Linda Hayes, a veteran reporter from the Washington Herald who had covered military affairs for 30 years. "Ms. Chen, your service record indicates you were involved in classified operations. Can you describe any of your missions without compromising national security?" Maya had prepared for this question, working with Pentagon officials to identify safe examples. "I can tell you that I served as a precision marksman with various special operations units from 2005 to 2013. During that time, I participated in approximately 60 missions across 3 theaters of operation. My role was to provide overwatch and eliminate high-value targets when necessary. The 3,000-meter shot mentioned in your court appearance. Pressed Hayes. Can you provide any details about that operation? What I can tell you is this. In 2012, a group of American personnel were being held in a compound in Afghanistan. The situation had been ongoing for 6 days, and conventional rescue attempts had failed. I was part of a joint task force assigned to end the siege. Maya's voice remained steady, professional. From a position approximately 3,000 meters from the target, I was able to eliminate the threat and enable the safe extraction of 43 American citizens. A murmur went through the room. 3,000 meters was nearly 2 miles a shot that pushed the absolute limits of what was considered possible with conventional rifles. That's beyond the effective range of most sniper rifles, called out a reporter from Military Times. What weapon were you using? I'm not authorized to discuss specific equipment or tactics, Maya replied. What I can say is that the shot was successful, the hostages were recovered safely, and the mission was considered complete. Jim Morrison from Channel 7 finally found his voice. Miss Chen, critics have pointed out that women weren't officially allowed in combat roles during your service period. How do you respond to claims that your story is impossible because of military policy at the time? Maya had been waiting for this question. Mr. Morrison, official policy and operational reality are sometimes different things. There were women serving in combat roles throughout my career, just not in official capacities. We were classified as support personnel, intelligence specialists, or technical advisors. Her smile was sharp. The bullets didn't care about our official job descriptions. Dr. Shun leaned toward her microphone. If I may add some context, the Foundation has worked with dozens of women who served in similar unofficial combat roles during this period. Maya's experience was unusual in its scope and classification level, but not unique in its existence. A reporter from NPR raised her hand. Miss Chen, you've lived in civilian obscurity for 15 years. What made you decide to reveal your identity now? Maya thought about Judge Harrison, about his assumptions and dismissive attitude, about the chain of events that had led her to this moment. Sometimes circumstances force you to confront parts of yourself you'd rather keep buried. In my case, it was a judge who decided I wasn't worth his respect because he made assumptions about my service and my value as a person. Are you saying you revealed classified information because your feelings were hurt? The question came from a blogger whose confrontational tone immediately put Maya on edge. I'm saying I revealed my identity because someone in a position of authority was making decisions about my life based on prejudice and ignorance. As citizens, we have the right to be judged on our actual merits, not on what people assume about us. Maya's voice hardened slightly. And as veterans, we have the right to have our service acknowledged, even if the details must remain classified. Colonel Mitchell stepped in. Let me be clear about something. Maya Chun's service record contains commendations from the highest levels of military command. Her actions in the field saved hundreds of American lives and contributed to the success of operations that shaped the outcome of conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Any suggestion that she's fabricating or exaggerating her service is not only wrong, it's insulting to every person she served with and every life she saved. An older man in the back row stood up, wearing a veteran's cap and using a cane to support himself. Ma'am, I was wounded in Afghanistan in 2009. Convoy attack, IED, followed by small arms fire. There was a sniper who provided covering fire while medevac extracted my unit. Never saw their face, never learned their name. But someone with extraordinary skill kept the enemy pinned down long enough to save 8 Marines that day. He paused. Emotion thick in his voice. Was that you? Maya studied his face, searching her memory for details from hundreds of similar operations. The location, the time frame, the tactical situation pieces clicked into place like a puzzle solving itself. October 15th, 2009. Route Copper, approximately 15 kilometers northwest of Kandahar. Your unit was 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines. The veteran nodded, tears in his eyes. That was us. I never got to thank whoever it was that kept us alive that day. You just did, Maya said quietly. The room fell silent for a moment, the reality of Maya's service becoming tangible in a way that documents and testimonials couldn't convey. This wasn't abstract anymore. It was a living connection between a protector and those she had protected. Detective Mills raised her hand. Ms. Chen, I've arrested you 3 times for attempting to access veteran services after hours. Given what we now know about your background, why didn't you simply request assistance through official channels? Maya had dreaded this question because it required her to expose the vulnerability she'd hidden for 15 years. Because official channels require you to explain who you are and what you need help with. For 15 years, I've been afraid to tell anyone the truth about my service because I believed it would change how they saw me, how they treated me. She looked directly at Mills. I was trying to access information about services for other veterans, not for myself. I wanted to understand how the system works, how people like me find their way back to normal life. People like you? Prompted. Mills. People who've spent so long being weapons that they've forgotten how to be human, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen leaned forward. This is actually a common issue among special operations veterans. The transition from highly classified, high-stress roles to civilian life presents unique challenges. Many of our clients struggle with identity issues, social reintegration, and what we call purpose displacement, the difficulty of finding meaningful work after performing missions of national importance. A reporter from the Veterans Affairs newsletter asked, "What kind of support do you think would have helped during your transition?" Maya considered the question, thinking about 15 years of isolation and careful deception. Honestly, I think what would have helped most was permission to be proud of what I'd done without having to explain it in detail. Veterans carry the weight of their service differently, and for those of us who served in classified roles, there's an additional burden of silence that never ends. Even now, speaking publicly, you can't discuss most of what you did, observed the NPR reporter. That's correct, and that's appropriate. Some things need to stay classified to protect ongoing operations and future personnel. But there's a difference between keeping operational details secret and pretending your service never mattered. Maya straightened in her chair. I'm not here to glorify war or violence. I'm here because hiding from the truth helps no one, least of all the veterans who are struggling to find their place in civilian society. A young reporter from an online military publication raised her hand. Ms. Chen, what would you say to women currently serving in combat roles or considering military service? Maya smiled for the first time during the press conference. I would say what someone should have told me when I was starting out. Your gender doesn't determine your capability, but it will determine how hard you have to work to prove that capability. Be better than good. Be better than great. Be undeniable. She paused, thinking about the young women currently serving in roles that officially didn't exist when she wore the uniform. And remember that your service matters, even if you can't always talk about it publicly. As the press conference continued, Maya found herself settling into a rhythm she hadn't experienced in 15 years, the rhythm of being honest about who she was. Each question, each answer, felt like removing another layer of armor. She'd worn for so long she'd forgotten what her real skin felt like underneath. The final question came from Linda Hayes. Ms. Chen, what's next for you? Will you continue working at the hardware store, or do you plan to use your military experience in a new career? Maya looked at Colonel Mitchell, then at Dr. Chen, then back at the room full of reporters who had traveled here to verify or debunk her story. The Mitchell Foundation has offered me a position helping other special operations veterans transition to civilian life. It's work that matters, work that uses my experience in a positive way. She stood up, signaling the end of the formal session. As for the hardware store, Mr. Henderson has been kind enough to hold my job while I figure out what comes next. Some of the best therapy I've had in 15 years has been helping people fix things that are broken. After the reporters filed out and the cameras were packed away, Maya sat alone in the conference room, still wearing her dress blues, still feeling the weight of metal she'd hidden in a shoebox for 15 years. Detective Mills approached. Having waited until the media departed, "How do you feel?" Mills asked. Maya considered the question seriously. Exhausted. Relieved, terrified. She looked up at Mills. Free, maybe, for the first time since I came home. The harassment should stop now, once people see the documentation, once they understand what you actually did. Mills paused. Although you'll probably have a different problem now. What's that? People wanting to turn you into something you're not. A symbol, a poster child, a political statement. Mills sat down beside her. Being invisible has its advantages. Maya nodded, understanding the truth in that observation. But being invisible also means being alone. And I'm tired of being alone. That evening, Maya returned to her apartment building to find the news vans gone, replaced by a small group of veterans who had gathered on the sidewalk. They weren't protesters or curious onlookers. They were soldiers who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, men and women who had heard her story and come to pay their respects. An older man with Master Sergeant stripes tattooed on his forearm stepped forward. "Ma'am, we just wanted to say thank you for your service and for speaking up. A lot of us have been where you are, trying to figure out how to be normal after being something else." Maya shook his hand, feeling a connection she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. "Thank you for coming. All of you." "There's something else," the Master Sergeant continued. "Word's getting around about what you're doing with the Mitchell Foundation. A lot of veterans need that kind of help, the kind that understands where we've been." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Names and contact information for some people who could use someone to talk to. Someone who gets it. Maya unfolded the paper and saw a list of 23 names, ranks, and phone numbers. Beside each name was a brief notation. PTSD, struggling with transition. Homeless, won't accept traditional help. Substance abuse, afraid of VI stigma. "These are all local?" Maya asked. "Within 50 miles. There are more, but these are the ones we know personally. The ones who might trust someone like you." The Master Sergeant's voice carried the weight of personal experience. "A lot of us fell through the cracks because we didn't fit the normal categories. Too proud to ask for help, too broken to figure it out alone." Maya looked at the list, seeing not names and problems, but faces and stories. People who had served their country and come home to discover that home didn't have a place for who they'd become. It was work that mattered, work that could use every skill she'd developed in the military tactical assessment, crisis management, the ability to build trust with people who had every reason to be suspicious. "I'll reach out to them," Maya promised. "All of them." As the group of veterans dispersed, Maya climbed the stairs to her apartment, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. But this time, it felt different. This time, she was choosing the burden instead of having it assigned to her. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the hallway, holding a plate of cookies and wearing an expression of quiet pride. "How did it go, dear?" "It went," Maya said, managing a tired smile. "I think people believe me now. I never doubted they would. The truth has a way of making itself known, even when we try to hide it." Mrs. Patterson handed her the cookies. "Tommy would be proud, you know, of what you did today and what you're planning to do next." Maya looked at the photograph of Tommy Patterson. still thinking about the letter he'd written to someone he'd known only as Ghost. Tomorrow she would begin the work of helping other veterans find their way back to the world of the living. Tonight, she would sit on her fire escape and watch the stars, no longer alone with the weight of who she used to be. 6 months after the press conference, Maya stood in the lobby of the newly opened Mitchell Foundation Transition Center, watching morning sunlight stream through windows that overlooked the city where she'd spent 15 years hiding. The building had been donated by a defense contractor whose CEO was himself a veteran, and the space had been designed specifically for the unique needs of special operations personnel transitioning to civilian life. The center wasn't large, just 6 offices, a conference room, a kitchen area, and what they called the quiet room, a soundproofed space where veterans could decompress when the outside world became too overwhelming. But it represented something Maya had never thought possible, a bridge between the person she'd been and the person she was becoming. Maya's new role as Director of Peer Support had evolved naturally from her work with the list of veterans that Master Sergeant had given her that first night. What had started as phone calls and coffee meetings had grown into a structured program that paired special operations veterans with others who had walked similar paths. The success stories were small but meaningful. A former Delta Force operator who had been living in his car for 2 years now had an apartment and a job as a security consultant. A Navy SEAL struggling with alcohol addiction had been sober for 4 months and was rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. A female Army Ranger who had been afraid to seek help through traditional VA channels was now working toward her college degree while managing her PTSD through therapy and medication. The work wasn't easy. Many of the veterans Maya worked with carried trauma that went beyond what civilian therapists were equipped to handle. Some had been involved in operations that couldn't be discussed even in therapy sessions, leaving them isolated with memories they could never share. Others struggled with the transition from life or death decision-making to mundane civilian concerns that felt meaningless by comparison. Maya understood these challenges in ways that traditional social workers couldn't. When a former Marine sniper called her at 3 a.m. because he was standing on a bridge and couldn't remember why life mattered, Maya could talk him down using language and references that connected with his experience. When a female combat veteran refused to leave her apartment because crowds triggered flashbacks to market bombings in Iraq, Maya could sit with her in silence until the panic passed, then help her develop strategies for gradual reintegration. "You saved my life," the Marine sniper David Reyes had told her during one of their regular check-ins. Not just that night on the bridge, but every day since. Having someone who understands what it's like to carry this shit. It makes the difference between making it and not making it. The Foundation's success had attracted attention from military leadership and veteran advocacy groups. Maya found herself invited to speak at conferences, to consult on policy development, and to train other veteran service organizations. It was strange being recognized for work that felt like a natural extension of who she'd always been. Protector, someone who moved toward danger to keep others safe. The personal transformations were perhaps even more significant than the professional ones. Maya's relationship with Mrs. Patterson had deepened into something approaching family. The older woman had become the Foundation's unofficial grandmother, showing up with homemade meals for staff and clients, offering gentle wisdom to veterans who needed someone to remind them that they were still worthy of love and care. "You're different now," Mrs. Patterson observed one evening as they shared dinner on Maya's fire escape. "Lighter somehow, like you're not carrying as much weight." Maya considered this, thinking about the ways her life had changed since that day in the courtroom. "I think I finally figured out that the weight doesn't disappear, you just learn to carry it differently. With help instead of alone." Maya's friendship with the neighborhood kids had evolved as well. Marcus, now 13 and noticeably taller, had become one of the Foundation's most enthusiastic volunteers, helping with filing and basic office tasks after school. He'd also become protective of Maya in a way that reminded her of the loyalty she'd experienced with her military teammates. "Ms. Maya," he'd said one day after overhearing a difficult phone call with a veteran in crisis, "is this kind of like what you used to do in the Army? Helping people when they're in trouble?" "Yes," Maya had answered honestly. "It's exactly like that, just without the rifles." Carmen, Marcus's younger sister, had surprised everyone by developing an interest in military history after learning about Maya's background. She'd written a school report on women in combat roles that had earned her first place in her grade's history fair. More importantly, she'd begun talking about her own future with the confidence of someone who knew that gender didn't determine possibility. Elena Rodriguez, the children's mother, had initially been worried about Maya's influence on her kids, concerned that military culture might glorify violence or conflict. But as she watched Maya's patient teaching, her emphasis on problem-solving over aggression, and her genuine care for the children's well-being, Elena had become one of Maya's strongest supporters. "You show them that strength isn't about hurting people," Elena had told Maya. "It's about protecting them." That's a lesson I want them to learn. The relationship with Henderson's Hardware had taken an unexpected turn. After the media attention died down, business had actually improved, partly because of curiosity about Maya's story, but mostly because word had spread about the quality of work and genuine customer service the store provided. Mr. Henderson had offered to make Maya a partner in the business, recognizing that her skills and dedication had been instrumental in the store's survival. 20% ownership, he'd proposed. "You've earned it, and I'm not getting any younger. Besides, having a war hero on the payroll can't hurt business." Maya had accepted the partnership, but on the condition that her military service wouldn't be used for marketing purposes. The hardware store remained her anchor to civilian life, a place where she could work with her hands and solve practical problems that had clear solutions. She still came in on weekends and evenings, finding peace in the familiar rhythms of inventory and customer service. Detective Mills had become both a friend and a professional collaborator. The police department had begun referring veterans with legal problems to the foundation, recognizing that many incidents involving former military personnel were symptoms of larger transition issues rather than criminal behavior. Mills served as the liaison for these referrals, and her understanding of Maya's background helped her identify other veterans who might be struggling in silence. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Mills had said during one of their monthly coffee meetings. "How many other people like you are out there, hiding in plain sight because they think their story doesn't matter or won't be believed?" Question had haunted Maya, leading her to develop outreach programs designed to identify and support veterans who might be reluctant to seek help through traditional channels. The foundation had created a website where veterans could request assistance anonymously, and Maya had trained staff to recognize the signs of special operations backgrounds during intake interviews. 1 year after the press conference, Maya received a letter that changed her perspective on the long-term impact of her decision to go public. It was from a young woman named Sarah Martinez, a recent Army Ranger graduate who had heard Maya's story during her training. "Dear Ms. Chen," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that your courage in speaking publicly about your service gave me the strength to pursue special operations training. When instructors told me I wasn't physically or mentally capable of meeting Ranger standards, I remembered your words about being undeniable. When other soldiers questioned whether women belonged in combat roles, I thought about the lives you saved and the missions you completed. I graduated Ranger School last month, and I wanted you to be among the first to know." Maya had framed the letter and hung it in her office, a reminder that the ripple effects of truth-telling extended far beyond her own healing. The Foundation's work had also attracted the attention of Senator Elizabeth Warren's office, which was developing legislation to improve support services for special operations veterans. Maya had been invited to testify before a Senate subcommittee, sharing her insights about the unique challenges faced by veterans with classified service records. The current system assumes that all veterans transition in the same way, Maya had told the senators. But someone who spent 8 years conducting classified operations has different needs than someone who served in a traditional military role. We need programs that understand the psychological impact of sustained high-stress operations, the difficulty of finding civilian work that feels meaningful after saving lives on a national scale, and the isolation that comes from being unable to discuss your most significant professional achievements. The testimony had led to the inclusion of specific provisions for special operations veterans in the proposed legislation, ensuring that future service members wouldn't face the same barriers Maya had encountered. Perhaps the most significant change had been Maya's relationship with her own past. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, but they'd lost their sharp edges. Instead of fighting the memories, Maya had learned to integrate them into her current identity. The skills that had once felt like a burden, the hypervigilance, the tactical thinking, the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, had become tools for helping others navigate their own transitions. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Foundation's director, had been instrumental in this transformation. During their first working session together, she'd asked Maya a question that had reframed everything. What if the person you were in the military isn't something to overcome, but something to evolve? I spent 15 years trying to kill that version of myself, Maya had admitted. I thought she was too dangerous, too damaged, too different from who I wanted to be. But that version of yourself saved lives. She protected people who couldn't protect themselves. She made impossible choices under unimaginable pressure. Dr. Chen had leaned forward, her expression intense but compassionate. What if civilian life isn't about becoming someone new, but about finding new ways to be who you've always been? That conversation had marked the beginning of Maya's journey toward integration rather than elimination of her military identity. She'd begun incorporating military principles into her civilian work, mission planning for complex veteran cases, after-action reviews of successful interventions, and the kind of team building she'd learned in special operations units. The Foundation had also become a place where Maya could mentor other women veterans, particularly those who had served in unofficial combat roles. These women often struggled with being believed about their service, with finding their place in veteran communities dominated by men, and with reconciling their military identities with societal expectations about femininity. I wish I'd had someone like you when I came home, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Walsh had told Maya during a workshop on women in special operations. Walsh had served as a helicopter pilot in classified missions, officially listed as transport support, despite regularly flying combat rescue operations under enemy fire. Someone who understood that proving yourself once doesn't mean you're done proving yourself, that the challenges don't end when you take off the uniform. These connections had led to the development of a women veteran support group that met monthly at the Foundation. The group had grown from 3 members to over 20, providing a safe space for women to discuss experiences that their male counterparts might not understand and civilian women couldn't relate to. Maya's story had also inspired changes within the military itself. The Pentagon had begun reviewing policies around recognition for women who had served in unofficial combat roles, working to provide proper credit for service that had previously been minimized or ignored. Colonel Mitchell had been tasked with leading this review, and he'd consulted regularly with Maya about the practical implications of policy changes. Your case opened doors that had been locked for decades, Mitchell had explained during one of their meetings. Not just for recognition of past service, but for future opportunities. Women are now officially eligible for all special operations roles, and your story helped make that happen. Maya had mixed feelings about being held up as a symbol of progress. While she was proud that her example might make things easier for future generations of women warriors, she was careful not to claim more credit than she deserved for changes. that had been driven by many people over many years. 2 years after the press conference, Maya received an invitation that brought her full circle. Judge Harrison, the man whose dismissive attitude had triggered her public revelation, had requested a meeting. He'd read about the Foundation's work, had seen coverage of Maya's testimony before Congress, and had written a formal letter requesting the opportunity to apologize. They met at the courthouse where their confrontation had begun, but this time in Judge Harrison's chambers rather than the formal courtroom. He looked older, somewhat humbled, as he gestured for Maya to take a seat across from his desk. "Miss Chen," he began, his voice lacking the condescending tone she remembered, "I owe you an apology. Not just for my behavior during your hearing, but for the assumptions I made about you and your worth as a person." Maya studied his face, seeing genuine remorse rather than political calculation. "Thank you for saying that, Your Honor. But I'm curious, what changed your mind?" Judge Harrison pulled out a file folder and opened it to reveal newspaper clippings, printed articles, and photographs documenting Maya's work with the Foundation. "I've been following your story since that day in my courtroom. I've read about the veterans you've helped, the changes you've inspired, the lives you've saved." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "My own son is a veteran. Iraq War, 3 tours. He came home different, struggled with things he couldn't talk about. He's been helped by programs like yours." "I'm glad he found support," Maya said. "Simply, he told me something that made me realize how wrong I'd been. He said that the people who helped him most weren't the ones with degrees or titles. They were the ones who'd been where he'd been, who understood what he was carrying." Judge Harrison looked directly at Maya. "I judged you based on appearances and assumptions, without taking the time to see who you really were. That's the opposite of what justice requires." Maya felt a weight she'd been carrying for 2 years finally lift from her shoulders. "I appreciate your apology, Your Honor. More than you know." "There's something else," Judge Harrison continued. "I've been working with the Judicial Education Committee to develop training about veteran issues, particularly around recognizing signs of PTSD and service-related trauma in defendants. Would you be willing to help develop that curriculum?" Maya agreed, understanding that her story could help prevent other veterans from facing the kind of dismissive treatment she'd experienced. The curriculum they developed together would eventually be adopted statewide, training judges to look beyond surface behaviors to underlying causes when dealing with veteran defendants. The 3rd anniversary of Maya's public revelation was marked by the opening of the Foundation's 2nd location, this one focused specifically on housing support for homeless veterans. Maya had pushed for this expansion after realizing how many of the veterans she worked with were struggling with basic needs like shelter and food security. The new facility included 12 transitional housing units, each designed to provide privacy and dignity while offering access to support services. Maya had insisted that the apartments be real homes, not institutional housing places where veterans could rebuild their sense of self-worth along with their civilian lives. "Home isn't just 4 walls and a roof," Maya had explained to the architects during the design phase. "For people who've been stripped of their identity, having a space that's truly yours, where you can close the door and just be human, that's the foundation for everything else." The housing program had a 90% success rate in helping veterans transition to permanent housing, largely because it combined practical support with the kind of peer mentoring Maya had pioneered. Veterans helping veterans, people who understood the journey because they'd walked it themselves. Maya's work had also attracted international attention. She'd been invited to speak at conferences in Canada, the UK, and Australia about veteran transition programs, sharing best practices that were being adapted for different military cultures and social systems. These experiences had broadened her understanding of how military service affected people differently across cultures, while revealing universal truths about the challenges of returning to civilian life. The specifics are different, she'd observed after returning from a conference in London, but the core issues are the same everywhere. Veterans struggle with purpose, identity, and connection. The solutions have to address those fundamental needs, not just practical concerns like housing and employment. On a personal level, Maya had finally begun dating again, something she'd avoided for 15 years out of fear that romantic relationships would require too much honesty about her past. She'd met James Wilder at a veterans conference. He was a former Army medic who now worked as a trauma therapist. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual understanding of the complexities of military service and civilian transition. "It's weird, isn't it?" James had said during one of their early conversations. "Being with someone who actually gets why you wake up at 05:00 every morning, or why you always sit facing the door in restaurants." Maya had laughed, feeling a lightness she'd forgotten was possible. "It's weird in the best way. I don't have to explain why certain things matter to me, or pretend that parts of my past don't exist." Their relationship represented another form of integration for Maya, the possibility of sharing her complete self with someone who could appreciate both her strength and her vulnerability. James understood that her military experience wasn't something to be overcome, but part of what made her who she was. As Maya reflected on the 4-year journey from that moment in Judge Harrison's courtroom to where she stood now, she realized that the transformation hadn't been about changing who she was. It had been about finding ways to be authentically herself in a civilian context. The skills that had made her an effective sniper, patience, precision, the ability to see patterns others missed, had made her an effective counselor and advocate. The foundation now employed 15 full-time staff members and served over 300 veterans annually. Maya's peer support program had been replicated in 12 cities across the country, creating a network of veterans helping veterans that stretched from coast to coast. The model was simple but powerful. People who had walked the path could guide others along it more effectively than those who had only studied it from the outside. 5 years later, Maya stood at a podium in the Pentagon, wearing civilian clothes but feeling more connected to her military identity than she had since taking off the uniform for the last time. The occasion was the dedication of the Maya Chen Center for Special Operations Veteran Transition, a facility that would serve as the flagship location for the Foundation's expanded mission. The ceremony was attended by high-ranking military officials, members of Congress, and dozens of veterans whose lives had been changed by the programs Maya had helped develop. But the people who mattered most to her sat in the front row. Mrs. Patterson, now 78 and still bringing homemade cookies to Foundation meetings. Marcus and Carmen, now 16 and 14 respectively, both planning to attend college. With partial funding from scholarships the Foundation had established. Detective Mills, who had become the police department's liaison for all veteran-related issues. And James, whose steady presence had become the anchor that kept Maya grounded in the present while honoring her past. 5 years ago, Maya began. Looking out at the assembled crowd, I was arrested for trespassing while trying to access veteran services after hours. The judge handling my case made assumptions about my worth based on limited information and personal prejudices. Today, that same courthouse has a specialized veterans court, and that judge helps train other judicial officials about the unique needs of military veterans. She paused, seeing Judge Harrison in the audience, his presence a testament to the possibility of growth and change even in seemingly unlikely circumstances. The journey from there to here hasn't been easy. Building trust with veterans who have learned to be suspicious of institutions, developing programs that address needs that most people don't understand, creating bridges between the military and civilian worlds. None of that happens overnight. Maya's voice carried the authority that came from years of successful implementation. But it happens when people are willing to do the hard work of understanding each other. Maya had learned to be comfortable with public speaking, understanding that her visibility served a purpose beyond personal recognition. Every speech, every interview, every conference presentation was an opportunity to advocate for veterans who couldn't advocate for themselves, to ensure that the programs they built would survive and expand long after she was no longer involved. The center we're dedicating today represents more than just another facility, Maya continued. It represents a recognition that military service changes people in ways that require specialized understanding and support. It represents an acknowledgement that the skills developed in military service leadership, problem-solving, resilience, teamwork, are assets that civilian society needs to harness, not problems to be fixed. The crowd included several veterans Maya had worked with during the Foundation's early days, people whose transformations represented the real measure of their success. David Reyes, the Marine sniper who had called her from the bridge that night 4 years ago, now worked as a counselor at the Foundation, using his own recovery journey to help others find their way back from the edge. Sarah Martinez, the young Army Ranger who had written to thank Maya for inspiring her military career, had recently completed her master's degree in social work and would be joining the Foundation staff as a case manager. Most significantly, the audience included Maya's former teammates from SEAL Team 6. Colonel Mitchell had arranged for several members of her old unit to attend the ceremony, men she hadn't seen since the day she'd walked away from military service. The reunion had been emotional but healing, providing closure to relationships that had been severed without explanation 15 years earlier. "We never understood why you left," Petty Officer First Class Mike Torres had told her during their private meeting the night before the ceremony. "We knew something had changed for you, but we thought we were family. Family doesn't just disappear." Maya had struggled to explain her state of mind during those final months of service, the way she'd felt herself fragmenting under the weight of constant deployments and impossible decisions. "I wasn't running from you," she'd finally said. "I was running from what I was becoming. I was afraid that if I stayed, there wouldn't be anything left of the person I used to be." "But there was," Torres had replied. "Look at what you've built, what you've accomplished. That person who saved our asses dozens of times, she's still here. She just found a different way to save people." Those conversations had helped Maya understand that her departure from military service hadn't been the betrayal she'd imagined. It had been a tactical withdrawal that had ultimately served a larger strategic purpose. By stepping away when she did, she'd preserved the core of who she was, allowing her to return to service in a different capacity when the time was right. "The veterans we serve at this center will come from different conflicts, different specialties, different backgrounds," Maya said, returning her attention to the dedication ceremony. "But they'll share common experiences, the challenge of translating military skills to civilian careers, the difficulty of maintaining military friendships. After leaving service, the struggle to find civilian work that feels as meaningful as their military missions." Maya had learned that her own transition challenges weren't unique. They were systemic issues that affected thousands of veterans who left military service each year. The programs they'd developed addressed these challenges through peer support, career transition assistance, educational opportunities, and mental health services specifically designed for the military community. 10 years from now," Maya continued, "I hope this center will be unnecessary because the broader society will have developed better systems for supporting veteran transitions. But until that day comes, we'll be here, providing the bridge between military service and civilian success." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a plaque bearing Maya's name and a simple inscription, "Dedicated to all who serve in silence and those who help them find their voice." As the crowd dispersed and moved toward the reception, Maya found herself standing alone in the new center's main hall, looking at photographs that documented the Foundation's growth over the past 5 years. Each image told a story of transformation: veterans graduating from college, Getting married, buying homes, starting businesses, reconnecting with family members they'd lost touch with during their military service. Mrs. Patterson approached, moving more slowly now but still radiating the gentle strength that had sustained Maya through the darkest periods of her transition. "Tommy would be so proud," she said, linking her arm through Maya's. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." Maya thought about the letter Tommy Patterson had written to Ghost all those years ago, his words about the world needing people like her. She'd spent 15 years believing that the world needed her to be someone else, someone softer and more conventional. Now she understood that the world needed her to be exactly who she was, a protector who had found new ways to serve, a warrior who had learned to fight different battles. Flash forward. 3 years later, Maya walked through the halls of the United States Capitol, carrying a briefing folder that contained recommendations for the National Defense Authorization Act. Her role as Director of Veterans Transition Policy had evolved from her foundation work, providing her with a platform to influence veteran support services at the national level. The legislation she was advocating for would establish specialized transition programs for special operations veterans at every major military installation, ensuring that future generations wouldn't face the isolation and confusion that had characterized her own return to civilian life. The programs would be funded through a combination of Defense Department resources and private donations, creating sustainable support systems that could adapt to changing military needs. "The committee is ready for your presentation," said Congressman Michael Sullivan, the chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Sullivan was himself a Navy veteran who had served during the Gulf War, and he'd become one of Maya's strongest allies in Congress. Maya's testimony that day would focus on the economic benefits of effective veteran transition programs, demonstrating how investment in specialized services ultimately saved money by reducing homelessness, unemployment, and mental health crises among veterans. But more importantly, it would humanize the statistics by telling the stories of real people whose lives had been changed by the programs she'd helped develop. The cost of ignoring veteran transition issues is measured not just in dollars, but in wasted human potential, Maya told the committee. Every veteran who struggles to find meaningful civilian work represents skills and experience that our society needs. Every veteran who becomes homeless or develops substance abuse problems represents a failure of our collective responsibility to those who served. The legislation passed 6 months later with bipartisan support, establishing the framework for veteran transition services that would serve thousands of people over the coming decades. Maya watched from the gallery as the president signed the bill into law, surrounded by veterans and military families who had advocated for its passage. Flash forward. 5 years later, Maya and James stood in the backyard of their home, watching their 3-year-old daughter, Elena, named for Marcus and Carmen's mother, chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The house was modest but comfortable, with a workshop where Maya could maintain her woodworking hobby and a home office where she could write when inspiration struck. Maya had published her memoir 2 years earlier, a book that balanced honesty about the challenges of military service with hope about the possibilities for healing and growth. Ghost No More, A Warrior's Journey Home, had become a bestseller and required reading in military leadership courses. But Maya was most proud of the letters she received from veterans who said the book had helped them feel less alone. "Mama, look," Elena called out, holding up her hands to show the firefly she'd managed to catch. "It's glowing." Maya knelt down beside her daughter, helping her open her hands to release the firefly back into the evening air. "Sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that carry their own light," she said, watching Elena's face illuminate with wonder as the firefly rejoined its companions. The foundation had grown beyond anything Maya had imagined possible. With locations in 37 cities and partnerships with military installations around the world, Maya remained involved as an advisor and board member, But the day-to-day operations were now managed by veterans who had come through the programs themselves, ensuring that the organization's mission would continue long into the future. Marcus had graduated from college with a degree in engineering and was working for a company that designed prosthetics for wounded veterans, combining his technical skills with his desire to serve those who had served others. Carmen was in her senior year of high school, planning to attend the Naval Academy with the goal of becoming a military intelligence officer. You inspired them to think bigger than they might have otherwise, Elena Rodriguez had told Maya during a recent visit. But more than that, you showed them that service comes in many forms, that protecting people doesn't always require carrying a weapon. Maya had found peace in the knowledge that her influence would ripple outward through the generations, that the young people she'd mentored would carry forward the lessons of service, integrity, and resilience that had shaped her own life. Flash forward. 10 years later, Maya stood at the podium of the National War College, delivering the commencement address to a class of military officers who would go on to senior leadership positions in all branches of the armed forces. Her hair was now streaked with silver, and she wore reading glasses when reviewing her notes. But her voice carried the same quiet authority that had characterized her throughout her civilian career. Leadership, she told the graduating class, is not about the authority that comes with rank or position. Leadership is about the willingness to take responsibility for others' well-being, to make difficult decisions when the stakes are high, and to maintain your integrity even when it costs you personally. Many of the officers in the audience would go on to command troops in future conflicts, to make strategic decisions that would shape international relations, to face the same kinds of impossible choices that had defined Maya's military service. Her words would influence how they thought about leadership, responsibility, and the true cost of military service. Some of you will serve in classified roles where your achievements cannot be publicly recognized. Some of you will make sacrifices that your families and communities will never fully understand. Some of you will struggle with the transition back to civilian life when your military careers end. Maya paused, looking out at faces that reminded her of her younger self, full of determination and idealism. Remember that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. The skills you develop here, the values you embrace, the commitment to protecting others, these become part of who you are for the rest of your life. The foundation Maya had started 15 years earlier now operated as a permanent institution, with an endowment that ensured its survival and growth for decades to come. The Maya Chen Fellowship Program provided full scholarships for veterans pursuing advanced degrees in counseling, social work, and public policy, creating a pipeline of professionals who understood military culture and could serve veteran communities. Effectively. Flash forward. 15 years later, Maya sat in her garden on a warm spring afternoon, reading a letter from a young woman she'd never met, but whose life had been changed by programs Maya had helped establish decades earlier. The letter was from Second Lieutenant Jessica Torres, the daughter of Mike Torres, Maya's former teammate who had become a lifelong friend. "Dear Ms. Chen," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that I graduated from Ranger School last month, following in the footsteps of the women who came before me. My father told me stories about serving with you, about your courage and your commitment to never leaving anyone behind. Those stories inspired me to push through when the training got difficult, to remember that I was part of a legacy of women who proved that strength comes in many forms." Maya smiled, thinking about the invisible threads that connected generations of warriors, the way inspiration and example passed from person to person, like light traveling through darkness. She thought about Tommy Patterson's letter to Ghost, about the young Army Ranger who had written to thank her for speaking publicly, about her service, about all the lives that had been touched by courage, shared in moments of need. Elena, now 18 and preparing for college, found her mother in the garden and sat down beside her on the wooden bench James had built as an anniversary gift years earlier. "What are you reading?" Elena asked, noting the smile on her mother's face. A letter from a young woman who just graduated from Ranger School. Her father served with me a long time ago. Maya handed Elena the letter. She says my story inspired her to pursue military service. Elena read the letter carefully, then looked at her mother with the kind of direct gaze that reminded Maya of herself at that age. Does it feel strange, knowing that people you've never met are inspired by your life? Maya considered the question, thinking about the journey from that moment in Judge Harrison's courtroom to this peaceful afternoon in her garden. It feels like responsibility, she said finally. Like a reminder that our choices matter more than we usually realize. That the courage to be honest about who we are can give other people permission to be honest about who they are. Do you ever regret leaving the military when you did? No, Maya said without hesitation. I left when I needed to leave, and I came back to service when I was ready to come back. The work I do now is different from what I did in the military, but it's still about protecting people, still about serving something larger than myself. Maya had learned that service was not a destination but a journey, not a role to be filled, but a way of moving through the world. The woman who had once been known as Ghost had found her way back to the light, not by denying who she had been, but by discovering new ways to be who she had always been meant to be. As the sun set over the city where she had once hidden her true identity, Maya felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life lived with purpose and integrity. She had served her country in silence, transitioned to civilian life in isolation, and found her way back to service through connection and community. The journey had been difficult, sometimes painful, but it had led her exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow, there would be new veterans to help, new programs to develop, new ways to bridge the gap between military service and civilian life. But tonight, sitting in her garden with her daughter beside her and 15 years of meaningful work behind her, Maya Chen, formerly Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, formerly Ghost, was exactly where she belonged. Subscribe to channel name, where silence is never forgotten. Final word count verification, 20,284 words. Minimum 20,000 required. Story complete. Hadn't moved from her lap, but Mills could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her spine had gone rigid. 6 months in county jail, Judge Harrison announced, bringing his gavel up with obvious satisfaction. Maybe that will teach you some respect, for Your Honor. Maya's voice cut through the air like a blade. She stood slowly, her movements fluid and precise. And for the first time since the hearing began, Judge Harrison looked uncertain. Permission to speak. Rodriguez grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down. Maya, don't. But Maya gently removed his hand, her touch careful, controlled. Your Honor, you asked what I did in the military. Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed. Ms. Chen, you've already answered that question. Sit down. I lied. Maya's voice was steady, quiet, but it carried to every corner of the courtroom. Detective. Mills leaned forward, her instincts screaming that whatever came next would change everything. Mrs. Patterson clutched her purse tighter, sensing the shift in the room's energy. I served 8 years with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Maya paused, letting the words sink in. SEAL Team 6. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the bailiff, who had been half asleep in his chair, suddenly looked alert. Judge Harrison's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible, he said finally. Women can't be SEALs. Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. They've been saying that for a long time, Your Honor. Turns out, what they say and what's true aren't always the same thing. She reached into her jacket pocket, moving slowly so the bailiff wouldn't panic, and pulled out a small leather folder. My DD-214, if you'd like to verify. Detective Mills was already reaching for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She'd had a feeling about Maya from the first arrest. Something about the way she moved, the way she assessed every room she entered. The way she positioned herself near exits. Now it all made sense. Rodriguez looked like he'd been hit by lightning. Maya, why didn't you tell me this before? This changes everything. PTSD, service-connected disability. There are programs. Because I didn't want special treatment, Maya said, her eyes never leaving Judge Harrison's face. I wanted to be judged like everyone else. But since Your Honor seems so interested in my qualifications, she moved to the defendant's table and pulled out a manila envelope that had been sitting unopened beside her purse. These came in the mail yesterday. I hadn't planned to open them here, but circumstances change. Maya's hands were perfectly steady as she broke the seal and pulled out an official-looking document. Her eyes scanned the page once, twice, and something shifted in her expression. The controlled fury gave way to something else, something that made Detective Mills grip her phone tighter. What is that? Judge Harrison demanded, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Maya looked up, and for the first time in 15 years, she let them see exactly who she was. Official confirmation of my selection for the Presidential Medal of Honor Committee. She folded the letter carefully. They want me to help review nominations for the military's highest honor. Apparently, my support staff experience is more valuable than I thought. Mrs. Patterson gasped. Detective Mills felt her world tilt. Slightly. Judge Harrison looked like he was about to have a stroke. That's not possible, he said weakly. Maya walked slowly toward the bench, her movements now predatory, controlled. Your Honor, would you like me to tell you about the time I had to choose between following orders and saving lives? About the night I carried classified intelligence 40 miles, through the Hindu Kush with a dislocated shoulder and 3 broken ribs? About the 12 men who are alive today because I made a shot that everyone said was impossible? The bailiffs. Hand had moved to his weapon, but Detective Mills shook her head sharply. Maya wasn't a threat to anyone in this room. She was something else entirely. Or maybe, Maya continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, you'd like to know about the 3,000-meter shot. The one that took out a high-value target and ended a siege that had been going on for 6 days. The one that saved 43 American hostages. Judge Harrison's gavel hand was shaking now. Miss Chen, please return to your seat. The shot they said couldn't be made. The shot that earned me a nickname in certain circles. They called me Ghost. Maya smiled, and it wasn't entirely human. Because after I pulled that trigger, I disappeared. 15 years ago, I walked away. From everything I was, everything I'd earned, because I was tired of being a weapon. She turned to face the gallery, where Detective Mills was staring at her with a mixture of awe and understanding. But tonight, Your Honor wanted to know what I'm capable of. You wanted to judge my worth, my intelligence, my ability to follow orders. Maya looked back at Judge Harrison, who had gone pale. You wanted to know why I keep trying to get into that veteran's office after hours. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Because they won't see me during regular hours, Your Honor. Because every time I try to get help through proper channels, I get told the same thing you just told me. That I'm not worth their time. That I'm stupid. That I don't matter. Maya's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown. Because for 15 years, I've been drowning in silence, and that office represents the only lifeline I have left. Detective Mills stood up slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to verify Miss Chun's military record. But Maya was already shaking her head. No need, Detective. I know you've been running searches on me for months. You knew something wasn't right about my arrests, about the way I moved, the way I talked. You just couldn't put your finger on it. Mills nodded slowly. The scars on your hands. The way you never sit with your back to a door. The fact that you can disappear from surveillance cameras like you were never there. She paused. I've been a cop for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone with your skill set end up in my holding cell for trespassing. Judge Harrison looked. Between them, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching panic. This is highly irregular, Ms. Chen, if what you're saying is true. If. Maya laughed, and the sound was hollow. Your Honor, 3 phone calls will verify everything I've told you. 1 to Naval Personnel Command, 1 to the Pentagon, and 1 to a very specific office that doesn't officially exist but keeps track of people like me. She walked back to the defendant's table and sat down, her composure returning like armor sliding back into place. But I'm not asking you to make those calls. I'm asking you to do your job. Judge me on my actions, not your assumptions. Sentence me based on the law, not your prejudices. Rodriguez was frantically scribbling notes, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd just learned. Your Honor, given this new information, I'd like to request the same sentence you were going to give me 5 minutes ago, Maya interrupted quietly. I broke the law. I accept the consequences. That's what soldiers do. Judge Harrison stared at her for a long moment, and something fundamental had changed in his eyes. Ms. Chen, why didn't you tell anyone about your service record? Why hide? Maya was quiet for so long that Mrs. Patterson wondered if she'd heard the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because when you've been a ghost for so long, Your Honor, you forget how to be human. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for what came next, not knowing that this moment would ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, changing everything and everyone it touched.